let's talk about one of the most peculiar experiments in history, an attempt to completely change how humanity measures time. It's a story from the French Revolution, a time when everything was up for grabs. Governments were toppling, the monarchy was gone, and even time itself was being reimagined. I'm talking about France's attempt to implement a new way of measuring time, an experiment that, to be honest, didn't exactly work out. It's 1793, and we're right in the middle of the French Revolution. France is in chaos. King Louis XVI has been executed, and the people have decided they want a whole new system for everything. Politics? Gone. Old social structures? Tossed aside. And even the calendar? Well, that gets a makeover too. But one of the most bizarre ideas that came out of this time was the metric time system. You might be thinking, wait, I've never heard of this. What was wrong with the old system? Well, that's exactly the point. The revolutionaries, fueled by their desire for rationality, decided that time itself needed to be restructured. They thought, if we're going to overhaul the way we live, we might as well fix the way we measure time too. So, in 1793, the French government introduced a completely new way of measuring time. And, folks, let me tell you, it was a wild idea. The idea behind the metric time system was actually pretty simple, or at least it sounded simple at the time. They wanted to go fully decimal with time, just like they had done with weights and measures in the metric system. The new day would be split into 10 decimal hours. Each of those hours would have 100 decimal minutes, and each minute would be divided into 100 decimal seconds. Sounds pretty futuristic, right? I mean, 10 hours in a day instead of 24. The idea was to make everything cleaner, more logical, more in line with the new era of rational thought that the revolution was championing. But, of course, it's not as easy as just changing the numbers around. First off, the new day was much longer than the old 24-hour day. One decimal hour wasn't just 1 hour. It was about 2 hours and 24 minutes in the old system. So, basically, the entire daily routine would have to change. You wouldn't be getting up at 6 a.m. anymore. Now you'd be starting your day at something closer to 8 a.m., depending on how the clock was set. This might sound fine, but imagine trying to reset every clock in the country to this new format. People would have to throw out their traditional clocks and get ones that displayed decimal hours, minutes, and seconds. I mean, you can imagine the confusion, right? Not only would people have to get used to the new times, but they'd also have to learn how to adjust their routines. If you've ever tried to switch from one system to another, like from 12-hour time to military time, you know that it's not exactly a walk in the park. Now, throw that onto an entire country. No wonder people were upset. And yet, the revolutionary government insisted on this new way of measuring time. They had a grand vision, rational, clean, and modern. But while this might have sounded good in theory, it turned out to be a huge logistical nightmare. One of the first big issues was the way this new system would affect industry. The workers who had been used to the old system, with its 24-hour day, found it hard to adjust to the new 10-hour day. How would they sync up with the rest of Europe, where everyone else was still using the old system? What about businesses that relied on standard time for trading or communication? And let's not even get into the issue of clocks. Imagine being in a small village where you had to completely reconfigure your timekeeping equipment, only to realize that most of your clocks didn't even have the capacity to show decimal hours. That's a problem. Another big issue was just, well, practicality. People weren't exactly on board with this new system. They had been used to the 24-hour day for centuries, and they weren't eager to throw it away for a new system that felt completely arbitrary. It's hard to blame them, really. Could you imagine trying to explain to someone that instead of counting time in hours and minutes the way we always had, we would now use decimal hours? And while the idea was to create a system of measurement that made sense and was scientifically neat, the problem was that it didn't take into account human nature. People liked their old ways. Then there was the resistance from the church. Time had always been tied to the rhythms of the church. Church bells were used to mark the hours of prayer and other events. The new decimal system didn't fit with the church's long-established schedules. You can imagine how well that went down when the church was already feeling pretty sensitive after the revolution had stormed through. Now, the system wasn't all bad. In fact, some people liked the logical simplicity of it. If you think about it, having 10 hours in a day with 100 minutes in each hour made the math way easier. The whole thing had a kind of futuristic, orderly appeal that the revolutionaries really thought would take off. But there's the thing, the appeal didn't last. By 1806, Napoleon, who had just come into power, was like, yeah, this isn't really working. He officially abolished the metric time system. People were tired of it. It wasn't practical, it wasn't compatible with the rest of Europe, and it just didn't stick. The revolutionaries had tried to completely change how we measure time. But, in the end, they found out that some things, like the 24-hour day, are a little harder to get rid of than others. It was a good idea in theory, but it just didn't survive the test of time. In the end, the metric time system is a fascinating example of how a grand, logical idea can fail when it doesn't align with human habits or practicality. The French gave it a shot, but in the end, it was a timing problem they couldn't solve. And that, my friends, is the story of how the French tried to change time itself, and how it didn't quite work out.